How's it going? Can you hear me?
All right.
How's it going?
I guess we're on, bro.
Can you hear me?
I can hear you.
All right, perfect. I basically went in and created a Microsoft Office document and linked some things to it. Is that kind of what you want me to do? Go through and kind of an outline of how I did it, and then include some pictures and examples of the process?
Yep. And I'll just set it up with a bit of a conversation, but and then I'll hand it over to you and ask questions on the way through.
Okay, perfect.
So you can go ahead and share your document.
Let's see, just do share screen.
Yep. You might want to zoom in so I can see it bigger. So
That work?
Larger. Zoom that sucker. Yeah, don't start there. Zoom in on one page so we can see your outline.
Okay. Let me get this thing out of the way here.
Well, I know I can. Okay, so before you get started telling me, one of the things people might want to know is, well, first of all, this is Clint Eppley, and we are going to go through his qualitative research process, especially qualitative coding. And one of the questions that people are going to want to know up front is, why did you choose qualitative instead of quantitative? And
well,
then just turn it over to you. Go.
Well, for now, or for me, I was looking at educators' perceptions or perspectives on the best practices for one-to-one technology. And so when I looked at how am I going to retrieve that information, there's not a lot of quantitative data, at least that I have access to, that is consistent throughout the grade bands that I was looking at over a period of 4 or 5 years. And so as a result, looking at 3 different groups of professionals' perspectives was important. And so I used technology personnel, administrators, and teachers who have been a part of this one-to-one initiative for a period of 5 years to gather my data.
Gotcha. And so you looked at it, and instead of quantifying perceptions, which can be done with the Likert scale, I'm assuming you find it just more meaningful to go in and ask and follow up.
Right. What did you say the last part?
The fact that you can ask follow-up questions when you can't do that on a survey where you're qualifying.
Right. You understand their experiences, and you can kind of see their emotion and how they're answering the questions. You can analyze lots of different aspects of the interview experience.
Right. Okay. So read us your questions and then tell us how you went about collecting data and then taking the amount of data that you had and doing something with it.
Perfect. You have questions ready, or do you want me to go ahead and go?
All right. Read us your questions just in case you can't read the screen.
All right. So my research questions were, what are educators' perceptions of the best one-to-one technology implementation strategies in 21st century schools? The second one was, how have educators' perceptions of the best instructional strategies evolved since one-to-one technology was first introduced into schools in the late 1990s and early 2000s. Then the third one was what experiences or attributes lead to transformational changes in the use of instructional technology. And so basically I was looking at, we've had a period of time where schools have bought technology and gone one-to-one or implemented personal devices to each student. And so looking at a district who has been a part of this type of initiative, what are the best ways to implement one-to-one initiatives, have one-to-one initiatives changed or evolved instructional strategies, and how have they done that? And then what exact experiences or attributes are allowing the devices to be transformational to instructional strategies in schools. And so that's kind of where I started.
All right. Now, how did you end up picking these forms of data?
Say it again. It's breaking up a little bit.
Oh, sorry. If you ended up doing interviews, observation, and artifacts, and there's a lot more choices out there.
Right.
So the question is, why did you choose these three?
Well, with the one-to-one initiative, obviously I was looking at administrators, teachers, and technology personnel. And so interviewing each of those groups of stakeholders or employees was obviously important because they each hold different roles. The devices are in use in each of those categories of faculty or stakeholders. The technology personnel use them one way, and then the administrators are using them in a certain way or implementing them, and then obviously the teachers. And so observing, I felt like, was an important route to go to understand, okay, so the interviews have been conducted. The participants have said this. Now, is what they're saying and what I'm seeing matching up? And then the artifacts was just further clarification for me to understand district policies, plans that teachers made, and how do those plans and district policies match up with what I was told in the interviews and what I saw in the classroom. So they're all three linked in my mind, and they go together in helping me determine the best answers to these questions.
Right, and for the students watching this, that's a three-legged stool, and a three-legged stool stands. If you only have two forms of data, your stool falls. You don't want to sit on something with two legs. You want at least three. Four is even better. But so this stool is going to stand, and it made sense, and it flowed together, and that's why Clint did such a good job in picking this and logically connecting those.
I think it's important to I think it's important to know that you're doing this with intent, like it's intentional. You're not just picking three; they're intentional to use each one of them. So I think that's important to understand too.
And you had an order in mind,
right? Exactly.
And it could have been another order, but you had this, and it was logical. So the main reason I was impressed, and I asked you to do this. Right after your dissertation, I said I could call on you because your defense made things very clear how you analyze the data, you coded, and I'm always telling students you've got this huge pile of data and you've got to reduce it down to smaller and smaller ideas until you get to the end and you know the answers.
Right.
And so I'm very happy that you said yes, and you can talk us through your processes, and I'll talk less now. It's your turn to let it rip.
Okay, and just stop me if I get going on a rant here. So, you're going to have a lot of data, obviously. Just to be transparent, I started out with, and my screen is shared, right? You're seeing everything I'm doing, correct?
Yes.
Okay. These were the interview questions I used for the teachers. There's 18 for the teachers. There's a separate interview guide for the administrators and a separate one for the technology.
Hold on. If you pulled up another document, you need to share your screen instead of sharing the Word document.
Okay, so new share.
Right, so you should just unshare what you're sharing and then just share your screen and whatever you see is what it will see.
Okay. Share screen. Perfect. Are you seeing the teacher interview questions?
Not yet. It just changed. Well, you just unshared, and now you're going to reshare. And now I see them, and they're very small.
Okay, I'm going to zoom in. This is not really of utmost importance, just an example of the interview guides that I use for my teachers. And so when I went into these interviews, these are the questions that I asked them. And they surrounded around implementation, professional development, and then instructional strategies. And so that takes a while, obviously, and you know that's the first step in, I guess, retrieving your data. And I'm going to go back to this original document, so hopefully my screen share worked.
Yeah.
Okay. And so once I asked those interviews, and I interviewed each of my participants, I had to go back and I had to transcribe the interviews to prepare for coding, and which is a big task, but it's also really important. And so when I went to transcribe these interviews, this is an example of one of the teacher's responses to my interview guides. And I'll zoom in on this one as well so you can see. But it's quite an extensive document. And so you got to go into the process with a plan in order to help allow the data to speak to you. So as you can see, this was my first question. It's not important to really understand the question as much as just seeing the amount of information that you're going to have to analyze and allow to kind of speak to you is the way I look at it. And so after I started, transcribing this, I really figured out a plan to go and attack these, because once you transcribe all these interviews and you've got your observation artifacts, it's time to start coding and then understanding what the data is telling you. And so to prepare for coding, transcribe the interviews, which I just showed you an example of mine, analyze the notes, analyze artifacts. And it's important to remember you'll have codes for each research question. And so I had a chart, or charts plural, for each research question. And so when you're analyzing the data, you have to find a way to kind of organize it. And I decided to color code it. And so as I was going through my transcriptions, the first portion of this coding is open codes. And I view that as more of a broad layer to coding. And I went through each transcription and I was trying to find emergent themes. So what is this interview telling me, right? And to do that, you include the open code, what is it telling me, properties of that code, and then raw data to provide evidence for the open code. Now, the way I did that, and I'll show you an example in 1 second, is as I was going through those transcriptions, like the one I was just showed you a minute ago, I used different colors to organize my thoughts. And so if I felt like a particular area of the transcription was related to research question 1, I outlined it in green and started writing my information in green. As I went through and I felt like information pertained to research question 2, I outlined in black. And then for research question 3 was magenta. And if I felt like information was relevant to multiple research questions, I used the color turquoise. And so that's kind of confusing, but I've got a picture I'll show you right here. And so let me zoom in. Basically, this is just another example of a transcription. It's a picture I took of the hard copy that I was using. And so this paragraph here, as I was reading through, I felt like that was information that was relevant to research question 2. So I circled it, and then I determined the open code, and then I began, as I was going, typing this information to charts. So that's where I actually typed the open codes and then had the properties and the raw data. As I went down, noticed the different colors, magenta and green. I just felt like this was a great way to organize my data so I could see what data was, relevant to which particular research question. And it made it easier as I went back and I, typed my charts, because you're gonna have to organize these codes into charts. And this is the first part of this process, the open coding. And this color coding really worked well for me. Going back here, after I Went through each transcription. After I color coded each transcription, I developed charts for my open codes, which is right here. If I'm going too fast, just slow me down. And so this is, I've copy and pasted this into a Google document, so the formatting is a little different, but it still works fine. And so for research question 1, my color was green. And so each note that I made in my transcriptions in green is in this table. And so on the left side, you have the actual open codes, which is what the data is telling me. What is it telling me in a short synopsis? The properties of the code. So designated one day for Chromebook rollout. So you have a tech day early in the year, and it was efficient. And then examples of the dialogue, obviously, is just raw data that's there to provide evidence to support your open code and properties. As you go through, you can see there's lots and lots of them. So there's a lot of open codes, and it goes on and on and on. And this is just for research question 1. And so the first part to this coding, open coding, is quite extensive, but if you organize it in the correct way, you can make the entire process pretty smooth. These charts make it easier to go on to the next phase of coding, which is the axial coding. Once I went through each research question, and I went through my color coding of green, black, magenta, and turquoise, and developed a similar chart just like this for research questions 2 and 3, it's important to go back and start to look at axial codes. And so this is kind of the next phase to this process. Now, it's a similar mindset, in my opinion, is you're trying to allow yourself to visualize emergent themes. Except this time, you're using the open codes themselves. And so what I did is the charts that I had up on the previous screen, I have a huge table in my classroom. I'll just show you a picture. And this huge table was used to basically reorganize each open code. And so this big blue table is in my room, and each of those charts I cut into little slips. So each slip is an individual open code. And as I cut them, I just immediately began categorizing them just based off the way I saw it. And this was to develop my axial codes.
I just want to chime in and say, I did this in my dissertation with sticky notes. This cutting up process is another way that I've had people reorganize things in the past. So the cutting up, or you put every single thing on a sticky note and be able to move it and group it, and physically being able to group it is really nice. Some people use software to do this, and software is available and you got to pay for it. But to me, this is the old-fashioned way that works best for a lot of people. So I think this is a prime example of, I took those ideas and started grouping them, moving them around until they made sense.
Right. And it allows myself to view it. And then what really helped me, and I didn't really realize at the time, but as I was cutting them and grouping them, I was going through all my data again. And so you're going through every piece of it for a second and third and fourth time. So by the time you go to write chapters 4 and 5, I mean, you really know it, and I think that really helps too. But as I was cutting it and grouping them, I started to see themes, emergent themes. And I took pieces of paper and I just, again, wrote on these larger sheets you can see here, what is this group of codes saying, right? And those became my actual codes. And so I then just grabbed each group, I went over to my computer, I typed the actual codes, typed the open codes that go with it, and I was on my way. Let's see if there's another picture. Yeah, so here's just a close-up. This next picture is a close-up of just these stacks. You can kind of see. It's just that exact chart that I cut into little strips and then just started, developing my actual codes on. But I think that was a good way to do it because it allowed me to actually see it. I'm a hands-on learner, and so that was good. The selective, after you develop the actual codes, the next phase is just what is all this data telling me? You kind of shrunk the data down into these codes that kind of make sense. And so the next phase to this is just saying, all right, so what is this actually saying in a few short words? So as you can see on this last chart here, once I had transcribed my actual codes into a chart, I was able to go in and kind of say, okay, so here's my open codes. Here's the actual codes I developed from the open codes. Now, what are my selective codes going to be? What is all this telling me? And so I had one-to-one increases efficiency in accessing information, and then one-to-one instructions for engaging or collaborative.
Just to remind people, all those little strips are the first things that you coded back on the first sheet. And then you cut them up, you printed them up, you cut them up, you grouped them, and now they're in these groups of open codes, and the axial code was that little piece, that big piece of paper you had in the middle of the group.
Right.
That last picture. And so, now you're moving from, instead of this huge pile of data, you took the first round of coding and you shrunk it down to these axial, and now you've got several axial codes.
Right.
And now you're looking for patterns in those the same way. And
right.
This is called data reduction. When you start with a huge pile, you won't go, now you've got the themes in a smaller pile, and then you collect your themes into bigger themes for selected codes. All right, roll on. Tell us how do you come up with these selective codes?
Well, the way I did it is once I had typed my actual codes, I had all of this data right here on this chart, and I just basically went through the same process of what are my actual codes telling me, and I made sure to stay true to my open codes. And learning is engaging and meaningful. Basically, is I don't want to say a summary, but a nice emergent theme or code that explains these two actual codes and groups of open codes. All of this can trickle down to learning is engaging and meaningful. And what's important to understand with that is these selective codes are going to be some of your headings in your chapter 4. And so when you go into your chapter 4 and you say, okay, here's this section, learning is engaging and meaningful, when talking about one-to-one technology, after that, the data and the information you use is going to come from this information. And so all of this is going to be linked using the same process of analyzing each code and then understanding what is this actually telling me. And I think it's important too to understand you can't look at it from a biased point of view. It has to be from an unbiased point of view of where you are strictly just trying to listen to what it's saying and let it do the work and just write what's being said by the data. Does that make sense?
So on the one hand, it's kind of subjective because you're making decisions through what you understand. But at the same time, you're organizing and you're grouping things that are logically connected. And then you take your axial codes and treat them like you did the open codes, and you group them.
Right.
And that becomes your selective codes. And as you go, it becomes more and more objective. Now, did you do member checks?
What's that? Say it again.
Did you do member checks?
I did, yeah. So it's important to have, people, it's important to go back and make sure what you're writing down and what you are, the way you understood the data is accurate. It's important to make sure you follow up or ask questions and determine that the data that you're putting down in this project is you heard it correctly and it's happening, and that and the way to do that is through member checks, and it helps bring relevance to the data and back it up.
And just to remind our audience, member check, you can be checking that their transcript is right, but member checks are also for checking your selective codes. You've got this theme, and you're sure that this is what's emerging, but you can go back and ask the participants would say, here's what I think I see coming out of this. Do you agree with that? Is there anything you want to clarify? And so that's one of the things member checks is for, is to make sure your axial and selective is on point.
Right. Absolutely. Let's see what else I've got on this originally. I'll say this too, just the last thing. When you go to do the actual dissertation, you have to provide evidence to your coding process in your work. So this is an example of the table that I used in mine. And so this was my research question 1. And so I went back to those charts that I created for the open codes, actual codes, and selective codes, and even included the raw data for the codes. So anybody that reads my work can understand my process and coming to my conclusions on my, my research questions. So it's important to stay organized, because you're gonna have to go back and kind of synthesize these charts into one at some point. So organization is kind of key there.
Right. Well, and I want to remind our doc students working on the dissertation that the thing you include in your dissertation does not have all the raw data. That would make the dissertation way too long. This is a summary of your process where you've taken clips of raw data that represent those codes that you used, so that we can see the process of data reduction from each stage, where we took ideas, coded them, grouped the codes, then you group the codes, group the codes, the axial codes into selective codes, and you finally got your big answers.
Right. Yeah, I mean, these are the exact tables I used. And so this table for research question 1, I showed you guys my my chart for my codes for my first research question. It was like 20 pages long, and this table is only 1 page. And then my second question, because you have a chart for each question, and so my chart for my second question is 1 page, just very very minimal but meaningful. In the third question, so yeah.
So it's good to use this chart while you're working. And like you said, you had 20 pages. We don't want to see 20 pages worth of stuff. We trust you. We are going to represent that in a 1-page document for each question. And Clint did a fairly good job. So that's why we asked him today, because he did all that work. Now, did you had member checks where you checked with your participants that you interviewed and whatnot?
Right.
What a peer debriefer?
Yeah, so with that, I'm trying to move back. I talked with them about what had happened, just to make sure that what transpired actually transpired. The member checks, if I remember correctly, kind of blacked out since then a little bit. I feel like I found a lot of that. But I actually found some good information that I had to clarify on from the interviews. And the peer debriefing, most of what they said was pretty much what happened, but I did use some sources that were knowledgeable what I was doing, just to clarify what was being said, what was happening, and try to create the best picture possible for my work.
Right. And I always say the peer debriefer's job is to pin your ears back and say,
right.
Show me the data that says this really is the theme, that your
right.
code led to the right thing. And
right.
you can't show me enough data, then you need to go back and rework it.
Right.
So it's got to be somebody willing to tell you when they question your judgment.
Right.
That's what peer debriefing is for.
Yeah, and that makes you feel better too. I mean, at least it did me, as the researcher. So your name's going to be on it.
And it makes you more confident when you're delivering your results that you're not making this stuff up, even though it's definitely a subjective lens. There were members in other words, participants in the study, and there were people outside of the study checking your thinking, making sure you weren't just making it say what you wanted it to.
Right, and I was lucky to have somebody who had been through the process, but that wasn't a participant, but was able to really provide some great feedback on my work, my data, and which is like Dr. Taylor saying, gave me more confidence in what I was doing, just because it was solidifying what I had found. So,
well, Dr. Eppley, you did a great job, and I appreciate you sharing this with us today. Although I could have just shared your dissertation defense, I wanted to give you a chance to come in and talk through what you were thinking and why you did what you did. So I really appreciate you.
oh, no problem. I enjoyed it. I hope I explained myself thoroughly, and yeah, if I can help in any
Well,
way.
if you have questions, I'm just going to refer them to you, and you can answer questions all day instead of me. How's that?
Yeah, that sounds good. I'm fine with that. So I'm good.
All right. Well, thank you very much. It was very helpful. Excuse me, Dr. Eppley.
No, you're good. No, you're
Dr. Eppley, that was.
good. Hey, it's good seeing you. Yeah, if I can help in any way, let me know.
All right. I appreciate you, sir. I will.
All right.
If you stop sharing, and I will end the meeting and assign some homework based on this.
There you go. Sounds good.
Let's make it. Think. Let's make them think.
Yep. Have a good one.
You too.